Okay. So the item of discussion is the term, I said it was this term meta, and I'm going to assume those here uh, are more or less unfamiliar, even if you are. Um, the first thing that might be worthwhile in addressing is the typical assessment of this meta in either spiritual or Buddhist circles, or at least what I've seen in my personal experience. And what I see is a treating it as almost a side quest or a an optional uh, type of practice. What I'm going to be talking about here is a meta that is intrinsically intertwined with everything you will, with the attainments and the progress that you'll experience. So, metta is a part of what the Buddha presented as a Brahma Vihara. So, the Brahma Vihara means Brahma means very high being, and Vihara is like a dwelling space. So, this Brahma Vihara was presented to the monks as a space in which consciousness can dwell within as they move forward on the path. And the reason that the Buddha offered this was to provide protection to practitioners as they were dealing with worldly affairs. So one thing that really I kind of want to really like hammer in is the this idea of metta as protection. Metta is the first characteristic of this Brahma Vihara that the Buddha presented. So metta is loving kindness, and it is basically the driving force within the Brahma Vihara. Um, so metta is the first aspect of this of how to create this dwelling space, so to speak. And the reason it's acting as protection is when one has a heart of kindness towards the world, it's very difficult to be emotionally perturbed by aspects of experience or situations that you might find yourself in, especially interpersonal situations. One of the problems with having a heart that isn't immersed in loving kindness is that um, the heart is very jumpy. It switches between hate and love all day. With loving kindness, there's basically a very small range of emotions that the heart goes through. It goes through sort of like a lovingness emotion. It goes through a sort of compassion type of emotion. It goes through a joyful emotion, and it also has an equanimous emotion to it. And these are all extremely stable states to be in. Like if you've ever been in a state of joy or love and something terrible happened to you in your life, it's almost like a just a little road bump as opposed to when you're in a state of hatred or a lower vibrational state and something bad happens to you, like you get into a car accident. This could emotionally uproot your being. You could have a breakdown even just because your emotional structure is so fragile. But in a state of lovingness or a state of joy, these things don't affect the emotional structure. They don't affect your nervous system, so to speak, as much. You're harassed a lot less by the body. It has a lot less of a grip on controlling you. It's sort of like you've moved beyond the tyranny of a slave owner who constantly whips you and hurts you when things go wrong. And you've upgraded to a very sort of like high end, progressive work environment where have uh, they have benefits and all this type of stuff. So you're upgrading your state of consciousness, where you abide in within consciousness. That's the goal of this practice is to um, basically recognize the state of consciousness you're in, understand the state of consciousness you want to go towards, and then getting rid of everything that doesn't align with the description, say, of metta and this Brahma Vihara. Uh, so that's sort of the goal that we are aiming towards is an alteration of consciousness, and not just temporarily like a jhana. The idea is to create a space within the mind that one dwells within all day and all night. So this is a sort of a permanent moving of locations. Um, does this make sense? Is there any questions or anything yet? Okay. So with that in mind, the description of metta of this Brahma Vihara. So I know I've been sort of using metta and Brahma Vihara interchangeably. Metta is a part of the Brahma Vihara, and it's the main part of it. And so it's the easiest, it's sort of like the doorway that I would say one enters this Brahma Vihara with. The other aspects of the Brahma Vihara are the four emotional states that I had mentioned earlier. So there's loving kindness, which is metta. There's compassion, which is karuna. There is something called sympathetic joy, mudita, and this is the joy experienced on account of others' joy. And the fourth is equanimity or upekkha. This is the qualities of this sort of abode, this dwelling space, this type of consciousness. And this type of consciousness experiences those four emotions and dwells within these four emotions. And it's abandoned anger, it's abandoned hatred, it's abandoned jealousy, it's abandoned wishing ill for people. And it hasn't just done this with people, it's done this with animals, it's done this with objects, it's done this with anything that can arise in experience. So the goal is to do that with all of a conscious experience until there's no space left filled with hatred, and everything else is filled with this state of just lovingness. Um, and this term lovingness isn't the best term. Um, just think of it as something more like a caring, like I care about this in a way that's wholesome, in a way that's not attached. So it's not like a attached type of love where you need to keep this thing or own this thing, but it's like a very wholesome friendliness even. And something to keep in mind is some people may never have had that experience or this emotion. Um, and so if that's the case, my recommendation is to um, try to read between the lines here, uh, and use your imagination very liberally. Be very liberal in imagining circumstances where this emotion could arise. Uh, So, one of the other aspects that I want to highlight is if one is able to do this, um, they are actually in the Theravada model. This is a vehicle to anagami. It will get you to anagami if you do this fully. Um, and the reason the reason that is because it requires um, an understanding of your mental processes at a very, very deep level. For you to understand how to not fall into states of anger, hatred, and to stay in a state of lovingness requires insight that's very, very high. So this is a practice that can take you very, very high um, if it's done with the intention to see it through and not to reach a point of satisfaction and stop, which is, I think, what many are attempting with certain things like these practices is to reach a point where they're satisfied with how they feel and then they stop and then naturally they sort of bubble or they fall back into sort of states of delusion and hatred and the reason is because they didn't do it in a deep enough way. So if this is going to be taken as if this is going to well you don't what I'm just trying to say is don't underestimate the the depth and the complexity and um, the length at which this specific practice can take you, and that it's deeply intertwined with this eightfold path model and just that path to awakening. It's very intrinsic to it. It can be. One other thing, and as I'm describing, as I'm going to be describing it more, my goal or my suggestion is to try to experience it for yourself while I'm describing it, if possible. So this is sort of we're playing a two-way uh, role here. So it does require hopefully some participation, if possible, other to get the most out of it. One thing is that as one's moving forward with insights into the path, one's emotional basis can often become unstable. And so what Metta offers is a lot of emotional stability as one's moving forward through the progress of insight, which is just a way of saying as one is gaining more wisdom, learning more things, um, it's really wise to have some accountability in your emotions, to have some source of ease, because as one's looking at the nature of the three characteristics within experience, the characteristic of impermanence, the characteristic of unsatisfactoriness, and that of not self or not mine, one may find that it can be quite jarring um, and uncomfortable and actually quite destabilizing. And one wants to have a stable aspect within their personality structure to carry them through experiences that are challenging. And this is what metta can do is in very challenging circumstances, it has no judgment, it has no criticism. It only offers a sense of security and safety, and it only offers a sense of lightness. Um, and if one has that through extremely challenging situations, um, they're fine. But if one doesn't have this and they go through dark nights or just challenging spiritual situations, I mean, anything could happen. They could they could stop the path altogether because they just get too scared of it. And that happens. Or they could just get into a bad place of mind, a bad mental state, and not have the equipment to get out of it. Um, and the equipment to get out of it is has so much to do with the state of emotions that you have, um, and what state of emotions you have the skills in cultivating. And if you have the skill in cultivating loving kindness, then the skill doesn't just disappear when things go bad. You still have it. Like when things, if we were to have you know, an apocalypse, you're not just gonna randomly forget how to ride a bike. I mean, you might be a little nervous, or you might be, you know, a little emotionally in a harder place, but you'll get the hang of it again because you've practiced. And so that's why my suggestion is typically for people to have some basis in metta. So as they're moving forward, as they're going through more challenging insight stages, that they have a source of nourishment to sustain them through that. And so they don't find themselves in the middle of the desert without water. Um, and many practitioners almost glorify this state of dryness, or their pride is sometimes intertwined with how much dukkha they can go through. I don't recommend this. Also, it's unnecessary. Um, and this is what metta is sort of suggested to be a help for. Um, there is no pride in suffering more. If you have pride in suffering more, you are ignorant. It's a fool's path to do that. So we want to find that which reduces suffering or creates a cessation of this process of the mind. And metta is one of the easiest, or not the easiest, uh, most accessible uh, means to practice this. And it's to be it'll be a very good help while when insights are arising. Um, so in that, because sometimes people like to take metta out of insight. They say it is almost a side thing. Um, but one aspect of it of metta is that as it provides a very stable emotional structure, and from that, as a result, you have a very precise way of perceiving things, a very unbiased, a less biased way of perceiving things. Because essentially, you've equalized one's relationship to everything, and you've said, I'm going to experience this state of lovingness, or at the very least, equanimity towards everything, everyone. And from that, you gain this capacity to perceive the field of experience uh, blankly, like evenly. You're not loving one person more than another. Um, you love them equally, so to speak. But don't get too attached to that word, loving equally. uh, your care for them is equal. Your appreciation of their beingness, of their existence is equal, and it's equal for everything. In that state, things are quite lucid. Um, you can perceive things very clearly. When you're in a state of hatred or a state of anger, what happens typically is you look back on that experience and you question why you couldn't see how dumb you were acting. Um, this is what happens with anger. Anger is a very non-lucid state to function, and you're almost it's almost like taking a substance or like alcohol or something. It actually impairs one's capacity to perceive reality evenly, um, quite literally. And so these states are very the states of these unstable states of anger and grief and basically just greed aversion delusion. They're very bad bad uh, places to look at reality from. Um, they won't serve you very well if your goal is insight. If you're angry and also trying to look at the mind, yeah, I have some news, and it's not good. It'll be hard. Um, the things will get distorted. Um, you want energy, but not anger, not in the form of anger. Uh, so Meta is very it creates a very stable platform to see things from. Um, I stopped giving I stopped making blind spots of experience, essentially, because I no longer am afraid of of losing something in my experience because I already kind of have everything I need. If one feels the state, it's very fulfilling. Be- It's a very fulfilling state, mainly because it affords e- uh, it affords care to everything. It's almost like when you really care about something, your mind relates to it in a different way. But essentially, we're figuring out how to care about everyone and everything in such a way that it includes ourselves. So it's not as if we're taking on that archetype of the helper person who can't help themselves, who only helps others, who's an internal mess, but is helping everyone and lives forever. That's not what we're doing because this is a emotional state that also takes into account our person, our character, and this is something that needs to be emphasized because it's not about being a martyr. It's not about giving your life up for everyone else. This is including you, and it's driven by wisdom and not by a sense for wanting to be a good person. If you want to be a good person, you're trying to uh, get something out of others. You're trying to get validation from people. You're trying to set up an image of yourself and have others reflect that back to you. You're not actually in a state of loving kindness. You're in a state of um, expectation, almost, uh, or even just desiring something. So the state of loving kindness, it has to be out of wisdom, because if there's not this understanding of like what it even is, 'cause we'll start off doing it wrongly. Uh, so we so we're getting to the point where it's probably I can be a little more explicit in what this state is and how we can cultivate it practically. Hopefully, I kind of covered a lot of the bases with maybe some confusion points and why one should be motivated to do this in the first place. Are there any questions? Okay.
I got a question. So if you're encountering someone that uh you don't really vibe with, do you just send meta and then don't spend time with them? What's the deal when having someone in your life who uh is not on the same frequency as you?
So the both of the characters in this situation, the distinctions drop and care is sent towards this sense of lovingness is given to both of these individuals where they're at. Um, if so, you want to move towards more of this type of space, more towards this. Uh, it when I say unconditional in this sense, it's the literal meaning of unconditional. Um, the unconditioned state of love is what one is dropping within. Uh, One isn't taking side quests in this. It's more like a dropping into that state, and from there, when someone is doing things that are what you would say annoying or not at one's level, it stops becoming a question of correction almost or of fixing, and it becomes more of a question about how is this how can I not contribute to the suffering here, ultimately speaking, like what is the best thing I can do in the situation that will uh, lead to the least amount of suffering ultimately. And sometimes that involves being humble and not assuming you can help, because sometimes this isn't necessary or possible. And the best thing is to hold a space within in one's heart of this energy field or this energy of like lovingness, and that itself stimulates uh, like a very productive process of healing if one's able to stay in that. It can be very helpful. Okay, was that helpful, Nick? Okay, so the process that I like in having a more grounded approach to this state has to do with seeing the barriers that are in front of one, um, because this is a more expansive and open state than the typical contracted state. And so what I find is in order to go from a contracted state to an expanded state, one can't force it. So one can't forcefully get there. One has to use wisdom and recognize where the blocks to that state is. So it's more like you're kind of seeing where am I getting stuck? Why can't I feel metta? Like what is the reason right now I'm having difficulty moving from an intellectual understanding to an experiential understanding. So that's usually a really good starting point because that basically gets to where you're at and doesn't assume you're at a certain place that you're not. And we all have some ways that we can be more open to metas, even highly practiced people. Uh, I'm actually going to take a quick break. I need to get some water. I'll be about a minute. But let that question, I guess, sit, and perhaps we can go into them when I'm back.
Thanks, man.
Okay. So one of the challenges that I had, and that comes up every once in a while between myself and Meta, is that I want something out of people. When I'm engaged with a person, oftentimes it's a conversation or discussion that's rooted either in uh, greediness. So I want something out of them. Maybe it's money or some other thing that humans love, or hatred. Maybe I'm trying to uh, dominate them. Um, so these are often attitudes people have towards others that serves as an obstacle to be in a state of meta. Because if you want to dominate somebody or extract stuff out of them without having uh, discussed it as something they want to do, um, you're not in a state of kindness. You're in a state of more or less survival, sort of like an animal, just with not much virtues, just kind of expedient. And you might not actually, follow through with these things that you're thinking about, but the fact that they're in the mind is more of the problem that I'm trying to get at. Uh, so we want to be very mindful of what we're thinking uh, in relationship to other people, because this is a very large block for many, many people. Um, we often feel justified in our attitudes towards others with hatred or frustration or agitation. We'll feel justified in feeling these things towards people. And this justification is based on a lack of investigation, really, because it's not justified, because it depends what you're trying to accomplish. if you're trying to accomplish tormenting yourself and experiencing anxiety on a constant basis, then you'll accomplish that. And in that sense, you could say it's justified. But if you're looking at these emotional states more clearly, um, you're not you're not affecting the other person's behavior positively through these experiences of anger, agitation, which is what we want. We want them to correct themselves, but through our own agitation, we'll exacerbate their emotional state, their structure, and they will have less ability to be effective in any domain, let alone the domain that you want them to be effective in. Um, so agitation doesn't resolve the problem even with another person. In fact, it just harms oneself. So sometimes we feel justified in our anger because we almost imagine it harms the other, but in reality, we are playing a very elaborate sort of trick up on ourselves and hurting ourselves very, very much every day. And loving kindness is a state where the desire is for health and wellness of the individual, of yourself. In a state of lovingness, you are uh, in a position with yourself where your interest is health, well-being, um, sort of peace. So when you see yourself in states of anger from a metta, your interest is to take away sort of the knife from this sort of child inside. You want to protect yourself from this because you recognize if you don't, you will experience a state that is mainly only going to lead to unskillful and unwholesome places in your future. So there's nothing really beneficial about it. But the feeling justified is a part of it, and so we have to drop the satisfaction we get out of our anger. It's really not. It's not. It was cute when we were young, but now it's ugly. Got to have to have to stop at some point. And I do think that way of contextualizing it is we're just becoming more mature. We're not we're not becoming better than others. We're not, getting a superpower necessarily. I mean, it is a superpower, but you don't want to see it like yourself as this amazing person who's has these qualities. Like, no, you're just learning how to not be uh, a fool, foolish. We're just learning how to not be uh, so childish in with how we deal with emotions and how we deal with people, and we're just growing up and hurting ourselves less in the process. Um, so this obstacle here, so I just sort of walked through like what I would do if I'm trying to contemplate why anger is something I don't want to go into. So I can kind of it's really good to see, okay, there's anger here, or there's this negative emotional state here, and there's metta there. And the only thing between me and metta is this emotional state. And uh, the highest interest is to free myself of pain. So you want to look at how you're tricking yourself, or how you're getting stuck there. Um, and a hint here is with this state of metta, you are completely critical of yourself. You give yourself full permission to be okay, and you don't ask why. You don't say, I need this to be all right. You just shut up and give yourself this state of wellness or affordance. You give yourself permission to be as you are and to be loved as you are by yourself. You give yourself permission. And it is like that. It's not like you magically trip into the door of beautiful, loving kindness randomly. It's more like I'm mature enough now to see the value of being open to myself and loving to myself. So I'm going to give myself permission to do that. And whatever states arise, I'm going to stop hating them, stop hating myself, and start trying to uh, understand them and treating them with care. And you stop creating distinctions about which things you do this to in yourself and which things you don't do this to. Um, and it's sort of like you fall back to that, into that more. The hindrances, so the, yeah, the wanting of things, the hating of things, tiredness, and overexcitation, and even doubt, these things, um, they soften quite a bit with loving kindness. So you almost disarm them by uh, being invulnerable to them through this state. In the state of lovingness, you're basically a space. You're not, there's nothing solid that can get hurt, that can get hit by anything. Um, you're not, like, hatred doesn't affect you. Anger doesn't affect you. People doing stuff that's rude doesn't affect you. And the reason it doesn't affect you is because you care about yourself and you care about the other person and you care not to contribute suffering to either. And you make that as a determination, really. And you just abide in that state of friendliness, openness, and allow these things to pass through like just like air. So it's a it's a much lighter state than like a solidified, personal, individual ego state because it involves a lot more people, including yourself, a lot more of yourself. A lot of the shadows and stuff will start to sneak their way back into the light for once, and that's what we want. We don't want them to be in the shadows because they can do the most damage there. Uh, and we just cultivate that, um, and we stay in that, and we are affected by a lot less. From here, if you try to go meditate, you'll have a lot more success. You'll be able to. It's much closer to samadhi. It's much closer to jhana than a default state. You're like you've like moved in to a house that's just down the block from jhana, whereas before you had to like take a flight or something. Uh, and I think that'd be an intelligent investment to do this. Um, if it resonates with your current state and your current position in your practice, if you feel this will be helpful to you, then I recommend it. So I'm not trying to force this. People's paths will be their paths. Um, but if one recognizes the value here, it's kind of a no-brainer. Why subject yourself to states of challenging states? It doesn't make sense if you cannot do that. Does anyone want to bring up any obstacles they may feel in regards to the feeling that one would have of metta?
Yes, I feel the obstacle of judgment of others and judgment of myself.
Okay, yeah. Um, the one of the pieces that will help is having compassion um, towards oneself while they're learning how to do this. Um, because in the beginning, you will be judgmental of yourself and you will be judgmental of others. But this is a person who's understood how to let go of judgment. This is someone who's learning, who's understanding he's being judgmental and is trying to resolve that. And this is an admirable aspiration. So be compassionate to yourself. Don't push yourself in a way that makes you feel bad for not doing this correctly. Metta is already active, and you just have to feel what it will, um, how it will influence you. It won't change everything simultaneously, but it will give you permission to um, see these judgmental structures in a non-critical way and start to recognize their faults and slowly deconstruct them and replace them with more affording, compassionate structures. They're not going to all of a sudden disappear. So there's a time element in some ways, but there also isn't a time element because you can give yourself that spacious, open kindness towards the judgmental critic you find in yourself because you're not limited to that. It's just an aspect that happens to be problematic, but it'll learn just like a child.
I hear you. Thanks. It sounds like a little taste of radical acceptance is in there.
Um, I would shy away. Well, if that term helps you, sure. Um, there's nothing radical about recognizing that it's painful to uh, be in opposition to things. So what I do is I try to normalize perspectives that are logical and make sense. I'm not trying to make it a mystical or sort of a very like it's not a high insight necessarily. It's just if we look and see to be in opposition to things, to be critical hurts and is unnecessary. And so it's not at that point, it's not very radical. It's just reasonable. Um, because with the idea of it being radical, you almost feel like you're stretching yourself to like do this. Uh, when in reality, if we want to get to the point where it'd be stretching ourselves not to do it. and this is just the nature of what I would call a natural maturing of the heart. It's what we want. Um,
Hey, Julian, uh, so uh, can I respond to Nick as well?
Go ahead.
Um, so, so this is uh, this is a bit of a conundrum, right? I mean, if we take the example of being agitated versus being relaxed, these two things they are in opposition to each other. So the solution to being agitated is to being relaxed, but the obstacle to being relaxed is being agitated. So it's a bit similar. If I wanted to wish metta to somebody, but I'm being judgmental about them, there's something about them that I do not like, and have formed a harsh opinion about them. Uh, Now, the solution to that is to wish metta to them, but the wishing metta to them has an obstacle, which is the fact that I am judgmental about them. Um, One way of cutting through this is to consider the individual that you're trying to wish metta to, and consider the judgment about them that you have. Uh, if we go slightly global, I mean, just one more human being, somebody's father, somebody's mother, somebody's sibling, somebody's friend, just like us, right? Wouldn't you, at the barest minimum, or wouldn't I, at the barest minimum, wish such a person well? May this person, but starts to reduce. So that's one way to look at it. One way to look at it from the point of view of a person. Another way to look at it is to look at it as a yogi.
Hey,
You
Addy,
know, this,
I'm gonna
yeah.
just thank you. I think I want to open it up to some others as well. I want to keep it at about an hour.
Oh, no problem, man. Cool.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, guys.
Well, since it seems we don't have any more questions, I'll end this here. Yeah, thank you.